Hello, I'm Emma Desi, and welcome to another episode of Turning Readers into Writers. If you're brand new here, welcome, and here's what you need to know. This is a community that believes you are never too old to write your first novel. No matter what you've been up to until now, if you're ready to write your book, I'm ready to help you reach the end. I focus on helping you find the time and confidence to begin your writing journey, as well as the craft and skills you need to finish the book. Each week I interview debut authors, editors and industry experts to keep you motivated, inspired and educated on all things writing, editing and publishing. If you want to catch up, head on over to emmadesi.com where you'll find a wealth of information and tools to help you get started. Before we dive in, this week's episode is brought to you by my free cheat sheet, 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write. In this guide, I give you 30 ways that you can find time to write in the small gaps that appear between the various errands and tasks and responsibilities that you have in your day-to-day life. Now, you might be thinking that you don't have any time to spare, but I can guarantee these top tips will give you writing time you didn't think you had. If you thought writing always involved a pen and paper or a keyboard, think again. If you thought you needed at least an hour at a time to write your manuscript, I help you reframe that. You won't be disappointed. Get your free copy of 30 Top Tips to Find Time to Write by going to emmadesi.com/30 Top Tips. Okay, let's dive in to today's episode. A former journalist, Thomas Emson has been involved in writing and publishing for nearly 30 years. He worked for local and national newspapers during his career, but 12 years ago took a chance. He gave up work and focused on fiction. Since 2008, he has had 8 horror novels published by Snow Books, one of Britain's leading independent presses. His novels have received widespread praise. Publishers Weekly said that in Scarlet, Emson fed fresh blood to the vampire genre in this visceral hybrid of plague, panic and the paranormal, which launches a series worth watching. The same magazine said of Pariah, with disciplined dexterity, Emson vaults among 3 time periods while presiding over a sizable and dissimilar cast, all of them integral and none underplayed. Emson has also self-published the acclaimed How to Write a Novel in 6 Months, based on the method he used to write 2 books a year when he was contracted to Snow Books. So let's chat to Thomas today about his novels, about his horror novels, and how you do write a novel in 6 months. So let's find out more about the method he used. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me. It's lovely to be here.
Now, I mentioned in the introduction that you were a journalist by trade. So what attracted you to that particular field of writing in the first place?
Well, I don't know. It was so many years ago. I started when I was 21, which is more than 30 years ago now. And I think it was just always something I wanted to do. I'd been doing a lot of writing as a youngster. I used to create little comic books when I was young, mostly football ones and sport ones. So it was. I think that kind of writing was always something I wanted to do. And at the time, I was thinking, well, I suppose I was thinking how to get into writing, and journalism seemed quite a sort of a normal and thing to do. So I started on weekly newspapers and moved on to regional daily papers. Worked mostly on the production side afterwards, because one thing about reporting is that you sort of you have to deal a lot. You have to deal a lot with sort of writing stories about people. But I was more interested in sort of in the words themselves and sort of handling other people's words, really. So it was going on to do a lot of editing and writing headlines and trimming and tightening other people's work, which really, really helps you with your own writing, because you can, by looking at other people's work and sort of working on that copy, you can see then what needs doing to your own copy. So that certainly did help, and I spent many years doing that till about 14 years ago, when I sort of gave that up full time to focus on writing. Yeah.
And so it sounds like, because I was going to ask you what's one of the things that journalism taught you most about writing generally, but it feels like you've sort of answered that a bit. It's looking at... Yeah,
there are other things as well, It teaches you to be tight. It teaches you to get to the point, okay, which is really important, that you get to the point of a story. It teaches you not to waffle, because if you as a reporter would send a story that waffles on, you would get it slashed to bits, by a sub-editor. So it teaches you to be tight and concise, to get to the point. It teaches you to write simply. Which is very important, because the point of writing is communication. And if you don't communicate and get your story across, then you've failed, basically. So it does a lot of things that it teaches you, a lot of things, and a lot of things it taught me. Yes.
I like that point that you've made about it teaching you to get to the point and being concise, if you like. I was talking to somebody recently about short stories, and I have a fear of writing short stories, because again, you have to be concise, you have to get to the point, you have to choose your words carefully, whereas novel writing, that longer form, gives you more space to waffle a bit and take more of a scenic route, perhaps, with the story than journalism or a short story might allow.
I think novels as well, I think you should get to the point. With novels, yes, you can spend more time. You can spend more time on character, on plot, but if what you're writing is not relevant to the plot itself, then it shouldn't be in there. So that's my view anyway. And journalism again did that to me. It taught me that if it's not relevant, cut it out. So yeah, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and of course you do have a little bit more space in a novel, sure, but I still think it applies. I think there's a great I don't know who said it, it's not me, but it's a little thing that goes, know the chase and cut to it.
Oh, I've not heard that before. Know the chase and cut to it.
It's not mine. It's not mine. I read it somewhere. So yeah, know the chase and cut to it. And that's a great way of, sort of, if you apply that to your stories,
Oh, I like that. Now, whilst you were doing your journalism, whilst you were having that career, were you also writing fiction on the side? And what made you decide to make that transition into fiction rather than non-fiction?
Yes, I was. I mean, I started, as I said, when I was a kid, I was sort of writing little stories, little comic books and things. And I really did want to write. But it was kind of, you kind of didn't know how to go about it and where to send stuff and what to do. I started as a student. I was sort of writing plays and things like this, and trying to write plays and trying to write little stories, trying to write horror at that time as well. But so I was always writing, really. And but yes, when I was a journalist, I was writing and sort of published initially then as well. So definitely, it's just been something I've always done, to be honest.
So a question I get a lot from people, or one of the things that my audience tell me that they struggle with the most, is finding that time to write their fiction in and around their day job, their family, all the other things that go on. I'm pretty sure as a journalist, your hours were fairly erratic. You went where the story was, you had to stay if there was a deadline, that kind of thing. So how did you manage that sort of practical element of doing the paid job, but then making time for the writing that you loved, the passion?
I when I was sort of properly starting to write, I tended my day job, the journalism, was not a day job. It was more of an evening job, so I didn't start till the afternoon, and finished later. So I would write in the morning when I was at home. Also, I worked in Newcastle for a while, on the Journal newspaper up there, and I was working there from 6 p.m. till 2 a.m. in the morning, a very late shift, a production shift. So I would then get home and I would write until about 5 or 6 a.m. and then I would go to sleep. So you kind of, you try and fit it in and find the time. And if you even have half an hour, I'm sure people could find half an hour in their day to do something. Mm-hmm. But I think we're probably going to talk about this later, on sort of how to sort of attempt to be more productive and hit goals and things. But definitely, you can find the time, in your lunch break, Mm-hmm. If you really want to do it, you'll find the time to do it, I think.
Yeah. It's nice to hear you sort of say that, because your working hours weren't the traditional 9 to 5, and I think that's encouraging for other people who maybe do shift work, who do those unusual hours. That again, it's just about adjusting your daytime to fit your needs, and you can do it either before or after, or even, as you say, find that 20-25 minutes in your lunch hour to jot something down. Now, I'm going to change tack just a little bit, because you write horror stories, and I wonder what it is that you love about that particular genre.
Well, I think that harks back to childhood as well. We all love being scared, don't we? In the safety of our own homes, and and I think that's where horror comes from. I think it's allowing us to feel that terror, but in a safe kind of environment. I've always loved horror. When I was young, I was reading Stephen King, James Herbert, Clive Barker. I loved, also liked horror films a lot. My books are quite visual and move quite quickly, so the film influence comes in there. So yeah, I just always loved it, really, and it seemed to me the most natural thing to write. So I did write horror. I like thrillers and mysteries as well, which is probably all wrapped up in horror, really. So there has been some writing in those genres too. But horror is kind of the genre I enjoy. I enjoy writing it. It's kind of fun, and I think it sort of just helps you get things out, really, the sort of things that go on in your head. So I think it's very helpful in that regard, horror. Yeah. So do you think it takes a particular type of brain, perhaps, that kind of plugs into that darker side of our imagination? And I think we all have, horror, if we're talking about it in a serious way, I think, we all have sort of, moments, darker moments, and I think that the expressing those feelings, expressing those emotions are important. You don't want to bottle them up. So I think writing generally does help in that regard, and particularly horror. I think, Stephen King writes horror based on what he calls the 10 bears, which are his greatest fears, and I do the same. I think we all horror writers, whatever level we're at or whatever success we've had, I think it all comes from there, from our own fears. And, I do find myself sort of writing about my fears. So and I think they can help deal with these things as I think it's very therapeutic, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. I write in a very different genre. I write women's contemporary fiction, and I've noticed, I was talking to someone the other day and I realized I'd no longer journal as much as I did, because a lot of the angst and things that are going on in the back of my brain come out in those drafts.
Yeah.
Been quite interesting to observe that.
Yeah.
Now, you've mentioned some of the kind of classic horror novelists that we all know, like Stephen King, but I wonder if you've come across any newer writers in the genre that you think it might be worth our listeners checking out.
Well, I stick with the old school of horror, really. I mean, it's kind of, I like Stephen King. I like James Herbert. Jack Ketchum I like, is an American author. I like him. There's the horror's kind of, it is nichey. It's a very niche genre, and there's a lot, I think, of sort of small independent publishers publishing horror these days. And if if you're looking for it, there's a lot out there. But yeah, I stick to the kind of the old school horror, really. That's what I like. That's what I enjoy. I really like Clive Barker. Clive Barker, I think, is incredible. Not just as a horror author, but as a creative generally, as somebody with an incredible imagination. So that's where I go, I'm afraid. So I can't make any recommendations, I fear.
No,
unless you all go back to to start with Clive Barker again and start with Stephen King. People who haven't read the early books certainly should go back to them. Because they're great, just great.
Oh, well, I'll link to those in the show notes so people can go and check them out for themselves. That's great. Now, one of the reasons I was very keen to chat to you is I'm always looking to be more productive in my writing. And you have written a book called How to Write a Novel in 6 Months. And you've said that this is the method that you used when you were writing 2 books a year. So I was like, got to talk to this guy then, must find out what the method is. So I wonder if you wouldn't mind sort of talking us through the basics of this method, so that listeners can get a feel for it before they go and read the book.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it was the book came out of it was a case of needs must, really, the whole thing, because I wrote my first novel, Maneater, which is a werewolf novel, in 2006, published 2008, and then I signed a contract with a publisher called Snow Books, and I agreed naively to write 2 books a year, which I thought, it was very exciting. So I thought, I'll do that. And then I was writing the second book, and sort of I was into it and just writing it. And I thought, I'm just never going to do this. This just is not going to work. So I just thought, how am I going to do it? How am I going to do it? So I just came up with this process of writing, and that's what I used to write all my books for Snow Books under the contract, which was 2 books a year for 4 or 5 years. 3 books 1 year. I wrote 3 books in 1 year.
Wow.
And what it is basically is it's you write a book in 6 months, right? You write it in 6 months. So those 6 months are broken down, and you've got to have goals, and you've got to stick to them. Again, know the chase and cut to it kind of thing again. So it starts with the first draft, obviously, and the first draft I encourage people, and I do it myself. I have an outline which I spend about 2 weeks doing. Then I start on a first draft, and I just plow through it. I do not stop to make corrections. I don't stop to check spellings. If there's some kind of research I need to do, I'll just put need to check this out. I'll just write and write and write. And I usually have like 70 to 80,000 word draft in 8 to 10 weeks. I just plow. But how I do that, the goal setting is, I think, is the kind of the engine that drives it. And how I set goals is I set weekly word targets for myself, not daily ones. I think,
why's that?
You know what? I think it goes back again to the, full-time job stuff and, full-time life, right? And all the kind of advice you get, and I tried this myself, all the advice you get is, you got to write every day. You got to write every day. Okay. So, so imagine, okay, you're starting, right? And you say, right, I'm going to write a novel. I'm going to write 1,000 words every day. So Monday you get there and you write, wow, I write 1,000 words. Great. Tuesday comes along, right? And just life gets in the way. Somebody's ill, or, you've got to take the dog to the vet, or, you've got to, somebody at work is being a pain. And then you miss that day of work. You miss those 1,000 words and psychologically you just go blah, what? Oh, I missed a day. That's pointless, right? Mm-hmm. And then it's so hard to get back into it. And I did that myself, missed a day or two of my supposedly write every day routine. And it was kind of, oh God, start again now. So I thought it's not practical when you're trying to work full time, lead a life. You can't do it. So I thought, right, weekly goals, right? So I set weekly goals. My weekly goals on first drafts is between 8 and 10,000 words. You can set any goal really you want, but because I needed to finish the novel in kind of 6 months, I needed that draft done in about 8 to 10. So it had to be like 8 to 10,000 words. So with weekly goals, it doesn't matter if you miss a day or two, right? It doesn't matter if you have to take the dog to the vet, or the baby's sick, or you have to take shopping to your mother-in-law. It doesn't, during COVID, it doesn't matter if you miss a day or 2 days. You can, so long as you hit your goal in those 7 days, that's it. It's fine, And I've done it. If you see the book, if you read the book, I use this grid, right, where I track the words every day. I track a word, and there are examples of the grids I've used for some of my novels in the book. And you'll see some days with lines through them where I didn't write, but you see, like, some weeks I might have worked just 3 days, but I've still hit the word goal. Okay. And so psychologically, that keeps you going forward. That keeps you going forward. Yeah, you don't think, I missed a day. I missed my writing it once a day. My everyday writing has gone to pot. So it keeps you going psychologically. So weekly word goals. That was the kind of that was the crux of everything. And then it all kind of worked itself out, out from there, from that center point. And after that, it was like that cracked it. I cracked it just with that little nugget, really. So weekly word goals, that's the thing.
No, I like that. It's certainly something I agree with, that you don't need to write every day. I think the key is consistency. So you do need to write regularly. And I like this with your weekly goal. It means that although you don't need to write every day, you do need to write regularly to keep on top of your weekly goal. And that's enough. That's all you need to do, is just be regular, consistent.
I mean, you could, if you don't like weekly goals, set monthly goals. I mean, it just so long as in that period of time that you hit your goal, that's if that's the only thing that's important, So, I mean, weekly goals, fortnightly goals, monthly. Just you set the amount of words or pages that you intend to do in that time, and I mean, there are examples on my grids which are in the book, I've hit my weekly word goals, and then on a week when I've gone on holiday, away on holiday. So there's the whole block of the week, apart from like 2 days, is marked holiday. But in those 2 days, I did hit the word count that I had to do, because I thought I've got these days to do it, and it just, that worked for me, that weekly word goals. And from reviews and from people I speak to, who've read the book, it seems to work for them as well, So, that's how I work still.
And so you get your first draft down. What happens after that?
First draft is done very quickly, as I said. I'm a bit sort of weird about these things, so I do it in Arial font, right? So, and then it's a mess, right? It's a mess, and then I go back on screen, and second draft, it's on screen, and I start going through it and tidying it up, tightening it, chiseling it away, and then when I've done a section, I change it to Times New Roman, so it starts to look. It's against just a thing I do. That's not a tip. That's just something I do.
Oh, that's great, because then you know where you're up to. You can see clearly where you've gotten your editing up to, where you're happy with so far. Yeah.
So it looks cleaner. That's just for me. So that's why I go through the whole manuscript doing that, and that will usually take 2-3 weeks, 4 weeks. No, more, obviously. Yes, it takes more than that. It takes about 6 weeks, doesn't it? I think, yeah. So, about 6-7 weeks that. So I just clean it up, and then I will print it off, and then I'll read it and proof it and correct and sort of, scrabble again, and it goes through another change then. So when I was writing like 2 books a year, I only really had I could only sort of have about 3-4 drafts, but because I was up against the deadline. But that's okay. Deadlines, I love deadlines anyway, because I've lived with them for all my working life anyway. So deadlines are great for me. I'm happy with them. That again pushes me forward. So then I go through it again and correct it, and then sort of until it's just a process then of going through and through and through, and then until you're happy with it. You can never say until it's ready. I'm sure that, because you just go on and on and on, wouldn't you? But until you're you think, this is ready to go, or I'm happy with this, But yeah, so that's the process, really. I
like it. I wonder if I can just take you right back to the beginning of that process and ask you about the plotting.
Oh yeah, okay, sure.
How you said that takes you about 2 weeks. I'm wondering, for your own process, for your own writing, are you very detailed in your plot, or do you have a kind of just maybe some bullet points or an overarching plot, or do you go down into detail about each chapter and what's going to be in each chapter?
So I spend about 2 weeks trying to come up with an outline, and I write my books in scenes. So all my chapters are very short. So my novels usually have between like 60 and 80 scenes, which eventually, when it works out, about 100 chapters. But anyway, yes. So it's not hugely detailed. It's 2 or 3 sentences per scene, really. And obviously they are scenes, so they're self-contained actions, as opposed to the traditional chapter where there's a few scenes that make it up. But yeah, so 2 or 3 sentences, just a rough idea. I start off with plot points. So I'll start off with what the opening image is, what the end is, And then with the sort of the first act switch, the first part switch, a turning point, a midpoint, and sort of a second act turning point. So I'll know those, and then I'll sort of, add in scenes to build up to those. Mm-hmm. So it's quite tightly structured. I mean, I quite like structure and shape to the story. But then I'll have I'll have the sort of outlines. There are examples of some of my outlines in the book, in How to Write a Novel in 6 Months as well. A couple of outline examples. And then, so then I'll have the outline, and then I'll start writing my first draft. Often the case is that I will veer away from the outline, and that's fine. That's okay.
And will you try and come back to it, or are you happy to let the story go and see where it takes you?
Yeah, I mean, I usually sort of get to the end, because my ending is quite clear sometimes. I'm pretty clear on how I want it to end. Sometimes, not always, but I'm pretty clear on sort of the kind of ending I want. Mm-hmm. And my books never ended cleanly, So I would, it's like having it going on a journey, isn't it? And you know your destination, and you have Google Maps telling you how to get there, but you might take a side road, but as long as you kind of get there. So it's kind of like that. So I don't really mind, veering away from the outline. It's like a little map, isn't it? It's a little map to get you there in the end. That's how I do it. But it's not a completely different book by the time I finish, but it can change, and I let characters do what they want.
And have you always been happy to do that, or is that freedom with your storytelling come from experience and knowing how you work? Because I think some new writers get caught up in having their plot line and sticking to it, and fearing that if they follow their instinct, they might end up who knows where. So has that ever been for you? Has experience taught you just to trust your instincts with this?
Yeah, just yes, I think so. Yes, because you're going to get somewhere in the end, And the thing is, anyway, if you do completely go off track and start writing, and your story goes on a completely different route, well, that's fine, isn't it? Just keep going with it, because no one's going to see it until you decide it's ready for somebody to see. So, no one's going to criticize you for doing that until you've decided, here it is, take it away, criticize it. So, just go with it, really. I mean, I would kind of, I think it's a good idea to kind of know where you want to end, vaguely kind of end, I think, and I think that's why structure is important to me, especially, beginning, middle, end. I think that's kind of, I like to have an idea of beginning, middle, end. But, sort of within those parameters, I mean, you can go anywhere and do whatever you want. And if you don't end up there, well, just, okay, so that's your first draft. So just second draft then, innit? Just, it's just, don't panic, isn't it?
Don't panic. Now, you mentioned there that for most of your stories, you know what the ending is going to be. You know where your end point is. And
vaguely.
To get there.
Yeah.
So vaguely. Do you think that's one of the ways to make sure that a writer finishes their novel? Is that one of the...
Yeah, I think so. I know a lot of people are seat of their pants writers, and I've done that myself. I've written without having a clue where I'm going. I know that's Stephen King writes like that. A lot of people write like that, and that's fine. That's great. And it does work. But I think if you're starting out, and even for those of us who've done it a few times, I think it just feels it's a bit of a safety net. just have a safety net, and it does drive you forward, because what can happen, I know that this can happen if you haven't maybe written a novel before and you're doing seat of your pants, is that you might hit a wall and you don't know how to break through it, and you might just give up. But if you've got that outline, well, you kind of know what the next scene is. So even if you're stuttering with one scene and you think this isn't working, well, you can always move on to the next one, and see how it kind of moves along. So I think, I'm not going to say I definitely recommend it, because people have got to find their own way. But I think that having outlines is certainly helpful, and helpful, especially if you're kind of a new writer kind of thing. I think it helps.
Yeah, I certainly wrote my first book with no plot, no plan whatsoever, and I did exactly as you've described. I went down some side tracks, and I had to then just go backtrack, right back, cut out 4 chapters, and then start again.
Outlines, I think outlines just save you time, especially. I mean, if you, especially because I had to write 2 books a year, I had to find ways to save time, and having outlines does it helps for sure. I'm slowly moving towards them. I see the benefit of them. I'm just trying to find the right way of doing it for me. So it's a lot of trial and error at the moment. Exactly. I mean, there are different ways of doing outlines as well, aren't there? I mean, you could just have vague ideas of what you want in each part of the book, or you can have detailed chapter breakdowns, and so I mean, yes, finding your way of doing it. I just scribble a few sentences is what I do. That's what I do. And that gives me both that kind of structure that I need, and also it gives me the leeway to divert if I need to, because it's not such a strict breakdown of what's going on. So it's sort of kind of a middle ground, really. I do, yeah. Well, I love that. So just to recap for our listeners, give yourself a plot or an outline, something that's got some structure to it to keep you on the straight and narrow, so you don't go too far wrong. Then get that dirty first draft down, as it's sometimes called. Dirty first draft, that's important. Yeah. And from there, you can do your revisions and your edits from there until you are ready to show somebody the story. Yeah. Fantastic. It's the thing is, it's better to have a crap first draft than no first draft at all. Exactly. I couldn't agree more. Yeah. And even with a crappy first draft, there's still an element of I think writers should still feel an element of what's the word I'm looking for? Of achievement from that, because you've created something out of nothing, even if it's not brilliant. Absolutely, yeah. This world and the story and these characters, and that's not to be sniffed at all. So. No, it's like having a piece of marble, isn't it? And then you start chiseling it, and it takes shape. That's what it is. Or just any piece of clay, and you start to shape it. That's what it is. I mean, just think of it as just a piece of clay, and then you start shaping it. So yeah. It's nice, a nice analogy there. And so in your experience of working with writers, new writers, what are some of the one or two of the sort of bigger mistakes that you see them make? We've mentioned not having a structure, not having an outline. I wonder if there's one or two other things that you could suggest to our listeners that they might want to consider. One of the things I see is overwriting, and the need to show off how that they're writing. Just tell the story and let the characters speak. Nobody really cares what you think. We just want to hear what the story is and what the characters think. That's funny you saying that.
I used to act, and one of my directors used to say that all the time as well. And it's don't overwrite, don't overact. Just tell the story is what he would say.
Yeah.
Just
Read
tell
the
story. That brought
Elmo
that back
Leonard
to me.
says. Elmo Leonard says, you know, if I see writing, I rewrite it.
Okay, I think I get that.
You know, yeah. Well, what he means is obviously if there's too much, you know, if it purple prose and, you know, sort of just this need to show off, you know, just this need to kind of look how clever I am, you know. But just tell the story straight. And there is a lot of this. And also another thing is that one thing I see is the first sentence or the first bit of a story. You know, you can, from stories I've seen from new writers who, you know, because I teach some a little bit of creative writing. So what I see often is that you could cut out half the first page, you know, just doesn't necessarily, just again, you know, cut to the chase, you know, just cut to the chase, get into the story, you know, I always like to drop readers right into the middle of the story, drop them in, you know, and then they're there, you know, don't kind of, you know, don't sort of wave at them from a distance and say, come here, because they might get bored by the time they get to you, you know, just sort of drop them in, you know. So I see that a lot, that people are totally unsure about how to start. And that's hard, isn't it? Writing those first words, which is, again, you know, first draft, just put anything down. But those first words are so hard. And then you can end up sort of just waffling on and describing the weather and describing all kinds of things, you know. Don't tell me about the weather, you know, just get into the story, you know. Do
you think, though, that sometimes as writers we need to do that? We need to get that description down. Because we're trying to ground ourselves in the story. And so
I think that, yes, that's right. I think that's good to do it in the first draft, isn't it? That's where you do it. Just do it there. And then you get a feel of what you're doing. Then you get a feel of where you are. And then you realize then, you know, that you don't need as much as you've actually written. You know, you can always pare it back, can't you? And you know, you have to be, I think new writers too are not critical enough of their own writing. You know, they write something and they look at it and they think it's ornate and beautiful, you know. But what you need to do, you need to get in there with scissors and blades and start hacking away at it. You know, that's what you need to do.
And is that a skill that comes with time, being able to do that?
Well, yeah, I think that does. I think that, you know, I find that with students, and you know, that they're so reluctant to touch even first drafts that they do. You know, that they're so concerned about. They think that they've created this thing that they love so much. You know. But, you know, what would the piece of advice, you know, kill your darlings, you know, that's another piece of writing advice, you know, these little, you know, aphorisms are great, you know, and they are helpful. But, you know, so you've got to just, you look at it and you think, yeah, that's just not good enough, you know, just dive in there and start hacking and just, you know, make it good, you know, you know, look at it, you know, but learning, yeah, you're right, learning to be critical of your own work is hard. It's hard, which again was journalism helped me with that, you know, to be critical, you know, because you had to be, or somebody else would be, and they would tell you as well why it was not good.
A tough skin,
you know? Yeah, you know. So you know, learn to be critical. It's hard, but try.
Well, now, Thomas, I'm just aware that we're of time, and but I wanted to ask you, you know, what are you working on now? I know that you've got quite a back catalogue these days. Are you working on any new fiction that we should know about?
Yes, I've just finished a novella called Iron Bones, which is about a writer's creation that seems to come to life and take sort of very nasty vengeance on anybody who's critical of her writing. And so I finished that, and then I'm now about 3/4 of the way through of redrafting a Wild West horror novel. It's called Beasts Came Up. It's called, and so I tell the title because the titles is I have to have a title before I can really start writing. But so I'm working on that. So I should have that hopefully finished by Christmas or early New Year. Then I'll send both together off to my agent to sort of see what she thinks of them. Yeah.
Fantastic. Now, just thinking as well, so for anyone who's new to your work, which of your books do you think is a good starting point, a good introduction to your style and the type of story you tell?
Well, my first novel, Maneater, it's a werewolf novel. So that's probably a good place to start. Although sort of one of my books that was most, it's a Marmite book, really. People either really love it, or really hate it. And it epitomizes what the kind of thing I'm trying to do. It's Zombie Britannica. So it's my zombie novel. And I intended it to be throw the reader into the story and just go. So it's really kind of fast paced. So that kind of epitomizes the kind of thing I do. But it's always good to start with Maneater, the first one, then go on to the second one and the third one. But yes,
and continue. Yeah. Well, I'll be sure to link to all of your books in our show notes. Now, where can listeners find out more about you online?
Okay, so my website is thomasemson.com. You can sign up to a newsletter there. You get a collection of horror stories free. You can also find me on Twitter at Thomas Emson. That's where I'll be unless I'm writing.
Fantastic. Well, Thomas, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you very much.
Before you go, I wanted to tell you about my Patreon page. Whenever anyone supports the show, it expresses just how much you're enjoying the content and how much you want it to continue. Your support helps maintain the podcast and keeps it going. It means I can create better resources for you when you're listening to the podcast or checking out the webpage. It means I can focus on getting a higher reach of audience. And when we get a higher reach of audience, we can get more guests that are really going to help you. And then who knows where it'll go from there. As a new podcaster and someone who's starting out and finding their feet in the podcasting world, just as I'm helping you find your feet in the writing world, I can't do it alone. I always need help, so I'd love it if you would support the show by signing up. There's just one tier, $3 a month, and for that I'll make sure that each week I'm delivering the best podcast I can for you. And as a way of saying thanks, I'll give you a personal shout out on the show. So check out the page at patreon.com/Emma Desi. That's patreon.com/Emma Desi. See you next time.